So before I get into the research itself, I just want to thank my support system in producing the research. So that is my supervisor, Chris Fremantle, from Gray School of Art at Robert Gordon University in Aberdeen, and also to the Arts and Humanities Research Council, who fund this work via the CLAW Leadership Programme. So the research advocates for support for creative practitioners who work in arts and health, criminal justice, socially engaged art, participatory art settings. This kind of work is brilliant and surprising and invigorating, and it can also be difficult to hear personal testimonies of inequalities and challenges participants face or have faced or are facing, and other concerns that we might have around the ways in which the arts infrastructure and the other core services that we might interact with are often built upon a culture of coping. So in tackling this second stage of the research, I undertook a literature review, and I started with thinking about wellbeing at work. And that's really the basis of the work around effective support which focuses on the moods, feelings and attitudes that come up as a consequence of working with people creatively. Wellbeing is described by the What Works Wellbeing Centre as being about people's experience of whether they are struggling or thriving. And of course, within that, there's lots of gradient. Wellbeing at work research is scant for the self-employed, and particularly self-employed creative practitioners working in participatory art settings. The Thriving at Work report, which does focus mainly on employment, it does state, albeit briefly, that the self-employed are at high risk of mental health problems due to the nature of the work, which can be isolating and less stable. Within the arts sector, the pandemic has placed further strain on an already dysfunctional set of systems for seeking and securing work. So I explored precarity in terms of creative practitioners not being paid the rates of pay appropriate to their professional skills and qualifications, and the expectation around working extra hours and that being unpaid. The impact of the pandemic has resulted in contracts being immediately cancelled or cut, reduced, and delivery needing to be redeveloped for online or postal working at short notice, and in the very early days of the pandemic without any effective support or without technical support necessarily as well. In terms of need, I drew upon the big freelancer report, and whilst that's not focused at participatory arts, there are interesting things around freelancers will do almost anything not to be seen as difficult, which produces challenges around being able to ask about and challenge working practices and conditions, and that's really problematic. In terms of reflective practice principles in people-orientated professions, I really thought about how professions like teaching, nursing, and those that work in the criminal justice systems, even though these professions are operating with considerable systemic challenges, it is useful to think about how they embed reflective practice and its role in processing and managing work-based experiences within their training. So whether that's a university training or an on-the-job training, and their development activities as well. Creative practitioners are not nurses or teachers, but they do work in schools and hospitals and mental health units, and can witness and experience challenging events for which they have not been fully trained or prepared for. And really importantly, they may not have a team with who they can debrief with on a regular basis. Reflective practice methods can be used, for example, to shine a light on experiences, and in so doing can be eye-opening and illuminating, can also be painful and frustrating. Uncertainty and uncomfortable truths can come to the fore about ourselves and the places where we work. And the delineations between self, profession, service provision structures, and the employment terms can be useful frames through which to explore practice and allow us to reflect on what's possible to change within the resources that we have, what we can influence and adapt, and what sits within the profession at large or wider society. Reflection is often linked to problem solving, and of course it can do that, but it can also support an ongoing sense of curiosity and be used to celebrate and acknowledge successes and mark achievements. There's an established practice of reflection in action, which happens during delivery. So those changes that are made while a session is in process, and reflection on delivery, which is the debrief that happens afterwards, the reflections that come afterwards. But there's a researcher in the US who suggests what can be added here is reflection before action. So, for example, how do creative practitioners really feel about returning to in-person work? So thinking about what feelings are coming up before the work takes place. I thought it was really important to write about the types and methods of support. So there's a wider understanding of what's available beyond the usual frames of reference. So I describe action learning sets, coaching, creative practice itself, embodied practices, mentoring and reverse mentoring, peer learning, performance appraisal for those who work in employed settings, and I know quite a number of people do. The role of research as a supportive activity, supervision, which is commonly cited, the importance of team meetings and writing. And what I would like to see is every creative practitioner who works in participatory arts to have access to a menu of support activities which reflects the duration, complexity and frequency of the work they are undertaking, and critically their individual needs and preferences also. So after I'd done the literature review, I held focus groups and conducted interviews. These were small in number, but the people in them comprised of a mixture of roles and responsibilities from a range of leadership styles and creative practitioners, and lots of different areas of practice as well. Generally, the work of creative practitioners working in participatory settings was felt to be isolating in terms of the breadth of creative practices, working within a relatively small specialism, or a practice informed by identity or a specific approach. And geography also has an impact as well. There was also a further impact of late contracts, which when they arrive don't sufficiently cover preparation, planning, team meetings and evaluation activities. And that reinforces the precarious position of creative practitioners. In my first report, Artists Practicing Well, I separated instrumental and effective support as a way of really trying to get into the territory of practicing well. And the contributors to this research reflected that while many organisations do this work well, others are less effective. And this inconsistency is perhaps due to how well the complexity of the freelance position and the work itself is understood. Not all participatory arts work is held within solid foundations, and subsequently creative practitioners are left to stabilise the situation through accommodating and adapting, which places unnecessary additional burdens upon them. Individual wellbeing is always subject to change, so the role of consultation and choice is essential. Simply embedding wellbeing training in an induction programme will not alone support wellbeing in the workplace unless a positive work culture is developed, which includes creative practitioners. Quality practice takes into account the specific participant needs and preferences and doesn't assume that these are fixed. Flexibility is therefore key. It is entirely possible for this approach to be adapted to support creative practitioners and their changing needs and preferences. It is important that creative practitioners have the opportunity to try different approaches and methods of support so they can work out what works best for them. Coping is normalised in this field of work. There is a need to prioritise paid work, and accessing support can be seen as a sign of weakness. These are all barriers to accessing support. Creative practitioners may not identify as being in need or in need enough, as creative careers are often built on adapting, making do, finding creative solutions with limited resources. In other words, coping and still managing to produce quality work. So I make 8 recommendations, which I have written as verbs, as it is only through doing that change will happen. So supporting, we need foundations of this work: inductions, introductions, fair contracts, which include time for planning, debrief, evaluation time, prompt payment of invoices. These things communicate value and respect to creative practitioners. Promoting effective support and reflective practice as a way of sustaining professional curiosity and not simply as a way of preventing burnout. Collaborating, approaches which include creative practitioners, organisations, commissioners and other stakeholders will help to ensure frameworks of support are suitable for both creative practitioners and in terms of management processes. And that combination will help to support sustainability. Planning, including creative practitioners in project inception, recruitment, development and delivery and evaluation, will help to embed support in a sustainable way. Learning, a period of experimentation, experiential learning and evaluation around support will help stakeholders to understand what works well. We're very used to evaluating impact for participants. We need to start thinking about that in terms of creative practitioners. Guiding, so updating grant guidance and advice to include specific questions around and inviting costs related to effective support will communicate an understanding of the true cost of participatory arts. And as I said, evaluating, we need to understand the impact of this work on creative practitioners. So I'm advocating for longitudinal studies in order to build an evidence base and build a picture of how this work impacts on individuals in the longer term. And then developing the need to structure funding to establish a multidisciplinary working group to ensure change happens and in timely ways. And just to finish my little bit of this session, I just want to issue an invitation to use the report as an advocating tool. So sharing it with organisations, funders, other creative practitioners that you might know, or if you're working with creative practitioners, trustees in the organisations that you work with. It can be used as a source of information about the issues, the types of support and the recommendations. And it can be used to mediate conversations, instigate, develop mainstreaming conversations around support. And as a resource for your own research and inquiry, what is it that you need in order to practice well? And we're going to explore that. I'm going to invite you to think about that in the breakout sessions. And then, as ever, this research report, which was 3 months in the writing, spread over a much longer time period, doesn't include everything that's happening. So please do share with me examples of practice, questions, comments and ideas, etc. And you can get in touch with me via email or online on Twitter. I would like to pass over to Alex Evans, who I'm delighted could join us today. Alex is an artist and artistic director of Kazzum Arts, who are doing brilliant work. So I'm going to hand over to Alex, and then after we've had Alex's presentation, there'll be time for some questions for Alex, and then also time in peer groups as well. So Alex, over to you.
Nicola. Hello, everyone. Thanks for the chat so far. There's so many interesting comments in the chat, so I'm sure we'll be able to have some time to get back and reflect on all of that together. But I'm just going to take a little bit of time now to introduce myself and the work of Kazzum Arts. For the benefit of audio description, I am a white man with blondish hair. I'm wearing glasses and a brightly coloured top. And I am sitting in my artist studio surrounded by drawings that I love to create. Just before I jump into a slideshow, I'll just take this moment whilst we're all together, just to really highlight my own journey as an artist and as a leader of an arts organisation. So I have about almost 20 years of experience of working within participatory arts with children, young people and communities. About 5 years ago, I took on a role as a leader of a small organisation. So I'm the CEO and the artistic director of a small charity based in East London. Prior to that, I was a freelancer working around and about and variously across the country with small organisations and some pretty large ones too. All of those experiences really supported me to instigate the change that I felt was necessary in my organisation. And I'm just going to be reflecting on what that journey looked like for me over the last sort of 4 years, really. The other thing that I need to do is just highlight my lived experience as an artist and my lived experience as a leader, but also as somebody who has lived experience of traumatic stress and mental ill health, and the understanding that so much of this work has been created because I've had to do some of that very deep inner work on myself and had to care and learn to care for myself. And so there's that kind of relationship that I have to this work, which is both professional, but also deeply personal too. So I'm just going to look after myself as I sort of share some of my experiences. I'm going to do that by sharing my screen. Here we go. I hope everyone can see that. That's a keynote screen. Nicola, is that all showing up good? Great. Okay. Cool. Here's a logo. It's the logo of the organisation that I steward at the moment. As I say, we're a small arts organisation with a focus on supporting children and young people from the age of 5 to 25 in London contexts, so inner city, high density, urban contexts. And we work in a multidisciplinary way using visual art, drama, music, film, design, technology, podcasts, poetry, you name it. If it's creative, if it's interesting, and if children and young people are telling us that that's what they would like to explore, that's what we're all about. We're completely a charity, so we're funded by trusts and foundations and donations. And what you can see here are some of the statistics that we were able to kind of gather during the year 2020 to 2021. So that was during the pandemic, the peak pandemic year, maybe. And so you can see that there's a significant amount of digital reach that happens during that year, and a significant amount of training that we provided to artists, students and teachers around trauma awareness and trauma-informed practice. So as the leader of an organisation, that's very much where we're going, moving into a position to become a trauma-informed organisation. And so the care and support that we are able to offer our artist community, as well as our staff and trustee community, as well as the children and young people, is very much working from a trauma-informed perspective. When we're working in hospitals or refugee and asylum seeking settings, or we're working in pupil referral units, we're coming across, or we're working at the interface of some pretty significant adversity and adverse childhood experiences. And what we've discovered over the years, and speaking from my own personal experience, that vicarious trauma, the transmission of trauma from a primary, potentially to a secondary trauma or a vicarious one, happens so often outside of language. It happens through the body, it happens through relationships, and that type of secondary stress can be extremely debilitating to artists, many of whom are drawn to this work potentially altruistically because they themselves have lived through adversity and are seeking out a helping profession so that they may be able to support others. So when we're looking at supporting artists, we're absolutely looking at it from the perspective of mitigating against and supporting the recovery, the processing of traumatic stress in the body, in the mind, and through relationships. And I'm thinking about how we come to do this work, how we are impacted or affected by it, and how we make sense of and learn from our experiences so that ultimately we can continue to do more and, dare I say, better work with the children and young people that we're working with. Although it's not always about improvement, is it? Sometimes doing what we do at the moment really is very good enough. My screen, oh, someone's drawing over my presentation. Thank you for the marks that you're leaving on my presentation. What you'll see in this presentation are in the green boxes some quotes from artists who participated in reflective practice. So that's just peppered throughout. But what I wanted to do was just first of all outline some of the stuff that we've been exploring over the last 4 years. So our affective support really kicked off in 2018, about 6 months after I took over the organisation, which itself had just received a 100% cut of our Arts Council funding. So we were in a very precarious position, a position of great threat and danger. And it felt very important, first of all, to do that thing where you put the mask on yourself before you begin to put the mask on other people. So one of the first things that we did was instigate an employee assistance program, which I believe kind of bridges that gap between HR resources, human resources, and then that affective support. And that's available to everybody that's working or volunteering across our organisation. We moved through a process of individual and group coaching to support our listening skills, to build empathy, to develop a sense of community, and also took part in different, instigated some different intensive CPD activity to support artists to build those skills in a bit more of an intensive way. That has continued. So CPD training I see is definitely about building the affective skill, the emotional regulation that is required to do the work that we do. And really, it's really synthesized over the last 2 years in reflective practice. So the support for artists looks like monthly group reflective practice. We have 2 sessions a month, one on a Thursday, one on a Friday. It's a group of artists that elect to be there. They will then commit to 3 sessions at a time, and that happens on a rolling basis. And we've been doing that for about 2.5 years. So that was happening before we went into all of the lockdowns. And it was a really vital support system as the pandemic kind of unfolded. We also provide individual or small team reflective practice based upon needs of artists or needs of teams. So if we're working in a hospital setting, we'll mobilize around that team to support them to think therapeutically about the impact of their work. I also believe that social opportunities, the ability to draw people together either in person, online, or in blended situations, build those bonds of attachment and care, which are vital to be able to allow the relationships in the organization to flourish. As we've touched on, the staff team also need that support. So they receive very similar type of offer. We have a staff team reflective practice, and that takes place with the drama therapist who does multidisciplinary approaches. I should have said as well, the therapeutic support for artists comes through an arts therapist. We felt that that was a language that artists were speaking, and it appealed to them to have a multidisciplinary ways into reflecting on their experiences rather than just through, rather than through solely a talking therapeutic form, for example. But that would differ from every organization and every sort of relationship that anyone would build with a therapist. We have individual reflective practice. Myself and my co-CEO, we also have leadership supervision to make sure that we're able to receive the care that the pressures of a leadership team are under without that filtering through or being unboundaried with members of our team. And we are a therapeutically minded organization quite naturally. Many of the majority of the staff team are undergoing individual psychotherapy outside of work. Also, the support for trustees is really vital. So they have access to that LifeWorks program. They have had access to reflective practice in the past, but it's very difficult to timetable. So that's a challenge I'll come on to talk to you about later. And they're included in all of the CPD opportunities and training that we do. So what is the impact of this work? And from my own perspective and from the conversations that I've been having over the years, I would suggest that there's a greater awareness and understanding of the personal impact of arts and health practice. So a greater sensitivity, an acceptance to that impact, a curiosity about it, and an honesty to be able to reflect on how we're feeling and how we're doing in our work. An increased quality in our professional relationships within the organization. So that's meant that we're able to observe boundaries, we're able to communicate more honestly about our needs. People feel that they're being cared for, taken care for, and that that kind of care isn't being instrumentalized or used against them, that people are understanding, aware of the of boundaries, of privacy, and of the need for a private space for artists to be able to reflect, and a private space for staff members to reflect, and doing that authentic work then enables us to come together. Just going through, it's allowed us to support change, transitions, beginnings, endings, new members of staff arriving, people going on maternity leave. The kind of regularity and the routine has been really supportive and containing, particularly in times of great uncertainty and change, where everything's kind of moving all around. Knowing that we have that kind of metronomic regularity of care in the organisation has been really important. People have reported an increase in their own personal creativity and artistry outside of the sessions, which is a great resource that many people are drawing upon for their work and to support them to regulate in times of stress. And I would say all of this is working towards a position of organisational health. And that is one of our key priorities in our current business plan as we're working forward, is working towards an organisational health. And it's opening up new opportunities and opportunities for recognition. Last year, we were honoured and privileged to be included in a really amazing shortlist of nominees for the Artist Practising Well Award. And we ended up taking that home, and it's on our mantelpiece inside the office. And that's the first award that Kazzum has ever won in its 33 years of history. And for us to win that, for the care that we've been able to offer our community, it feels extremely significant. What are the challenges? There are many, and it does test patience when you're introducing something that is different and is new and may not be speaking a language that somebody will have spoken before. So the job of understanding and trusting in the therapeutic process can for some be a significant challenge. Us communicating our aims and expectations of those workshops without, with the reflective practice sessions specifically, without feeling people are coerced or being objectified or being told that they are coping or not coping in any kind of way. Allowing it to be an offer that can be wholeheartedly taken up by somebody, but also respecting people's choice that they might not be ready for that yet, or they may have tried that in the past and it didn't quite work for them, and allowing that to be an ongoing conversation without shame. Establishing those relationships with those support professionals. A lot of people would say, well, how do I find the therapist, for example? We have 6 therapists that are currently plugging into the organisation in different capacities, with 2 of those therapists being the kind of lead group holders, and the other therapists being providing individual support. So it does take a village to support an arts organisation, after all. Availability, commitment and programming, particularly in times of blended online, in-person working, understanding the need for some artists that they want to commit to spending the time to do this, but their lives are busy, things are changing, they have caring responsibilities, etc. So being really aware of that and open to that and allowing that to be the case, rather than falling into a position of blaming or being frustrated. You know, we're providing all this support, why aren't people turning up? Or they cancelled for the 4th time this year, for example. So kind of really just working through some of that in the relationships, respecting everybody's time, respecting the space, the confidentiality that's required, and also understanding the boundaries of any safeguarding concerns. So us understanding that there is therapeutic containment in the organisation, that as a CEO, I don't have access to what's going on inside that room. So trusting that the therapist is doing their brilliant work, and will let me know if there is something that I need to know, with full respect to the confidentiality of that person. So really kind of working through those challenges has been something to learn. And then also, I guess a challenge has been about the security of the funding. So how we can do this, we've never had a funder question it. We've never had it be questioned, I guess. But with the particular challenges of the funding landscape at the moment, how do we keep building this in? Because we've raised the expectation, we want to keep doing this, and we want to ensure that it remains in all of our budgets. But we don't know what our budgets look like beyond the next financial year. So that's a really significant challenge. Just last couple of slides, if that's okay, Nicola, because I'm aware I'm meeting the end of my time. But I'm just thinking about some of the next steps. So of course, we need to secure the funding to continue and also to build upon the current provision that we're offering. We need to continue that consultation and being responsive with artists to make sure that we're meeting what the group needs, but what different individuals will need at different times. And that if there is a peak in somebody's need, and we are able to put something into place to support them and guide them through a process. I'm really interested in exploring a more kind of interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary variety of different types of approaches. Talking therapies or group processes aren't going to work for everybody. I myself, I'm really getting back into my body through movement and body-based practices, but also through holistic practices. So thinking about reflective practice as not just necessarily a talking therapy, but how do we find evidence and efficacy for the benefit of aromatherapy or craniosacral massage as a legitimate form of reflective practice interests me. So I would be very much up for evaluating and communicating the efficacy of the work, continuing to participate in networks like this. So thank you to the Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance and to Nicola for your incredible work to push this up the agenda and keep it there. And hopefully that will be spread around in other organizational bodies and other funders too. I'm really interested as well in how we can share knowledge and resources. We're a small organization. How can we work in partnerships, potentially with some of the other organizations that are also employing the same freelancers? So in London, you know, there's a lot of organizations and lots of freelancers are working for all of them. They might be receiving the care here, but maybe not in some of the other organizations. So how can we kind of share that load and bring it up the agenda and make that more possible? How can we include the trustees in this? Because, you know, they're really important and they are also volunteers. And they're also extremely important in terms of thinking about entering into the national portfolio organisation. So anyone that's making a bid for the Arts Council National Portfolio later on this spring, there's a big piece of work there about how trustees are going to enact the values and the vision of the organisation. So how we can really encourage and upskill people who may not have an awareness of some of the risks that their workforce are facing at this point. And then the last things, yeah, this is just the kind of things to consider. I mean, these are just some questions that I thought might be useful if one was thinking of implementing some of this type of stuff. So what issues are currently arising within the organization? What is the impact of that? And how is that being communicated transactionally, dynamically in relationships? What are we learning from how we are at the moment? Thinking about how and who needs to participate and what combination. We've made a deliberate split between artists and staff team, and then we come back together and we have that space, but that's not the only model of working. How frequently, when does it take place, where, what impact are you looking for on an individual or an organization? How will you track that process? What modalities would you explore in that space? What precedents for this work are taking place? So there's, as Nicola rightly said, you know, there's some amazing organizations doing some really pioneering work around this. I just get to talk about what I do, but there are so many brilliant people that have set up some incredible projects. So getting out there and kind of learning from other people's experiences is always really great. How are we going to pay for it? Big question. And how are you going to kind of contract or form those agreements about the work, and how is this ultimately accessible for the members of your team? So thanks very much. So yeah, you can find out more information about Kazzum on our website. You can email that email address if you want to say hello. And also I should just say that we do deliver training, and if anybody was interested in doing any training around trauma awareness, we've got 2 dates coming up in March, and all the information is on our website. It would be remiss of me to neglect to say that part. So thanks for the plug. And I will now stop sharing my screen and just say thanks very much.